all 25 creation accounts in the Bible, and for that matter, even the shorter passages that deal with creation. Likewise, a scientist needs to do the same thing. And what I'm trying to demonstrate in Chapter 5 is we need to get past this problem, both at the seminary level and in the science research lab level, of over-specialization, where we become an expert in only one tiny, narrow discipline, and we see maybe a few anomalies in our discipline and assume that all the other disciplines have the problem solved. No, if you see anomalies across the board in all the scientific disciplines, then it tells you got the wrong model.
Yeah. I'm just wondering how you narrowed it down to 120 pieces of data out of all the record of nature, but you said you chose from different scientific disciplines.
Well, I'm kind of guessing at the top of my head. You might want to look in the book and see how many there actually are. I know it's over 100.
Okay.
But I know it's not as high as 150.
But nevertheless, to narrow it down to that from everything that's out there, you had to think about these things.
Well, I actually wanted to put more than just those
sure.
125 or whatever I got in the book. But then you run into the problems that, publishers don't like books to be 800 pages long.
Right.
So what I did was pick out what I thought were the most significant and say, well, obviously there's more, but...
Yeah, at least 109 that I can see there.
Right. But I think the point is well taken. If you've got a model that doesn't explain those 109, then your model is in trouble.
And these are taken broadly, then?
They're taken broadly.
That's the idea.
And I'm not trying to claim that those are the only things you need
Right.
to explain, but you need to at least be able to explain those.
Okay. So what are some of the principles, then, as you continue to build this model? What are some of the things you need to look out for?
Well, at the very end of the chapter, I kind of lay out the guiding principles that we use here at Reasons to Believe to build a model. One I've already talked about. You want to start with as simple as first, then complex. I mean, people who come to our creation conferences notice that we start with the simple sciences of physics, math, and astronomy first, and then we step-by-step move you towards the more complex sciences of chemistry, biology, and then we end up with anthropology, and then we bring Ken in to talk about sociology. And so that's a purposeful progression we're doing. Start with what is simple, go to that which is more complex.
Simple in your mind, maybe. I know what you mean.
As a, people don't normally think of physics as simple, but it is simple in the sense that in physics, we can use mathematical equations that accurately describe the phenomena of what we're observing.
Yeah.
Whereas I think both of us have understood that doesn't work with our teenage sons. I don't know about you, but I've not been able to develop a set of differential equations to predict the future behavior of either of my sons. That's because they're just so incredibly complex. And then the other principle, of course, is you want to start with where you got complete data or near complete data and use that to interpret areas where it's not complete. And you want to take into account all the biblical content, not just some of the biblical content, likewise all the scientific content, and then practice the principle of integrity and credibility and humility of being. I see in these creation evolution debates a lot of lack of humility. Of saying, we could be wrong here, and we need to be corrected. And so looking for opportunities for that kind of correction and development and revision, and trying to build an explanation that has the earmarks of integrity and credibility. And I think I got about 10 more in the chapter, but hey, people can get the book and see these guiding principles that we use.
Right. And those sound like they might come from the Bible, too.
Yeah, they do.
Yeah. Well, thank you for that. Hugh, what are you going to talk about in the next chapter?
In the next chapter, we're actually going to look at the kind of foundation we get from our model by going through the biblical data. So Chapter 6 is looking at all these creation accounts and creation of texts and saying, what do they say that's going to guide our interpretation of the record of nature? And really trying to make the point for people who are not familiar with the Bible is just how detailed the Bible is at describing the origin and history of the universe, life, and humanity. So I kind of lay that out in Chapter 6.
Good. Listeners might want to pull out their Bibles and go along with us and check to make sure Hugh is right on interpreting. Well, here we are on Chapter 6. You are going to talk about 4 scriptural cornerstones, because I know you mentioned in the last episode about all these various creation passages.
Yeah, Chapter 6 is where we kind of lay out what does the Bible say about creation. But I begin by talking about the four cornerstones that these creation texts speak about in terms of creation.
Okay.
And the first cornerstone is dual revelation. The Bible repeatedly makes the point that God has revealed himself not just through the 66 books of the Bible, but also through the record of nature. And you see that in the Belgic Confession. So the Reformation scholars recognize as two books theology that we see in the Bible.
This document goes back to the Reformation period, this
Right,
Belgic
the
Confession that you're
1500s.
talking about?
Right,
Okay.
right. And making the point that God faithfully, truthfully, reliably reveals himself through both the record of nature and the words of the Bible. It's not that, one is inferior or superior to the other. Both reveal truth. They reveal different segments of truth, but both can be trusted. So that's an important thing to recognize, that both the theologian and the scientist are working with a trustworthy database, and there's a basis for trying to integrate the two.
Okay.
In dual revelation, the Bible also makes the point that there's overlap between what the record of nature teaches and what we see in the words of the Bible. They don't totally overlap, but there is overlap.
Okay, so is that one of the cornerstones then? The
That's
idea
one of the
dual revelation?
cornerstones.
Okay.
The second cornerstone is that God has got multiple purposes for creating. It's not just to make a place for us to live. I document 12 purposes in a previous book, Why the Universe is the Way It Is, where I kind of give almost a chapter to each one, but in this book, I kind of at least give you the list of the different purposes. And incidentally, that may not be a complete list. Those are the ones that have been revealed to us through the record of nature and through the words of the Bible. So those are 12 that we know of. But that's important because often people in the creation evolution debates are only looking at one purpose. And that hampers their ability to interpret both the record of nature and the words of the Bible. Mm-hmm. And the third cornerstone would be the chronology for creation. That there actually is a chronology. God's trying to do something, and he has a purpose for creating the universe. There's a before and an after. And again, a lot of interpreters, all they think about is cosmic history. But from a biblical perspective, there's a history before the universe exists. There's a history after the universe exists. And so it helps us to interpret what's going on in this universe, to recognize that there's a before and an after. And it's important. Like one of the creation accounts I have there is Revelation 21 and 22. It talks about the creation that God will institute after he's fulfilled his purposes in this universe. But it's important to know what's going on in the future creation to understand what's happening in the present creation. Likewise, what was going on before God created the universe. So it's not just the history of life in this universe that needs to be considered. We need to look at the bigger picture. And that's kind of a guiding interpretive principle. You need to start with a big picture first, and then you can go into kind of a microscope and look at the details that's taking place underneath that big picture.
Okay.
And the fourth principle would be the detectability of the divine. I mean, as I talk to atheist scientists, excuse me, a lot of them complain and say, we don't see God. Well, one of the things you see in Scripture is the repeated claims that God is imminently detectable. We can't see him, we can't touch him, but his handiwork is everywhere. And the reason why we can't see him or touch him is he transcends our space-time realm. If he's outside of our space-time realm, because we're limited to space and time, we're not going to see him or touch him unless he chooses